Alright, I'll just get started with the topics for today. So first off, Elsa 2.8 has been released about 30 minutes ago. So let's go over the release notes. So the first change of note was some fixes for the iTenant accessor made by Tommy. So this improves the multi-tenancy support. There was a build issue fixed by Pete Davis. So this has something to do with case-sensitive file systems or case-sensitive file systems. Some improvement on the workflow instance summary model. This is useful when you query using the API endpoints and you want a list of workflow summaries. So now it includes metadata. This is a new feature that I demoed last week. So this is about being able to list workflow versions through the designer and the ability to revert to all the versions of the workflow definition. So that's now part of the 2.8 release. Some library reference system component meta annotations or a preview package thereof that has been fixed. That was causing issues for some users. There's a new SQL editor created by Mohammed. He's hopefully gonna demo this later today. It includes IntelliSense, which is pretty cool. Some mapping for SQL for the trigger entity that was introduced, I think, with Elsa 2.7 or even 2.6, I am not sure, but we missed something in the SQL provider, so that's been fixed by Matt. And Jay added a nice little feature that purchase Azure subscriptions on startup. Now this is only an issue if you actually use the Azure Service Bus integration, and when you use that, what happens is that Azure Service Bus creates topics, but if you are in a multi-node environment and multiple queues get or subscriptions get created for those topics, those subscriptions do not get cleaned or removed when those nodes in your cluster go out of commission, leaving behind phantom or orphaned subscriptions. And the issue with that is, as long as the application generates messages, those subscriptions keep receiving those messages, but they are not being consumed because the consumer is no longer there, and that causes ultimately the subscription count to reach its maximum number of items, and that will cause exceptions in the application, and I see this happening in a production instance. It will cause that production instance to fail. So this is a pretty important improvement. Without this, you would have to manually check your topics in Azure Service Bus and manually delete them. So that's less than ideal. So this is great. And finally, there was an issue with the retention module or the cleanup job in that module, which takes care of cleaning out old completed workflow instances. And then there was a recent improvement that allows the application to implement custom logic to determine what workflow instances would be deleted, but that also introduced a bug, and that bug has been fixed with this change. And what's nice about these release notes, they were entirely generated by GitHub that I just discovered today. So it includes things like new contributors, a full changelog here, and a list of contributors of this PR. So I think that's really nice. So work has been done on Elsa 3, and this was mainly cleanup work, but it's interesting all the same, so I'll briefly go over it. First and foremost, the structure has been restructured, so almost everything lives inside a folder called modules, and this more or less embraces the onion architecture. I think that's the name, I'm not entirely sure. Let me look up what the correct name is. I think I had it exactly right. So what does this mean? Every module adds its own set of features to the system. So that means workflows itself is a feature with other features that consume core features. So for example, this workflows core module introduces a workflow runner. So it contains the logic to execute workflows. And then there's another module that exposes functionality to HTTP clients, just as an example. Similarly, we have a management module that introduces functionality to manage workflow definitions, another one that adds persistence, and then there's the runtime one, where this one introduces some primitives to host workflows. And it also offers a bunch of abstractions that can then be used by other modules, in this case, the proto actor module. So these are just examples for workflow related functionality. As a developer, you can extend the system by creating your own modules, which at the end of the day are just .NET packages. So to just give another example, there's a JavaScript module that adds scripting features. using the JavaScript syntax, using the geint packets, but it also adds activities to the system. So this is a big restructuring. And then let's take a look at how to configure these modules in your application. So here's a new folder called bundles. And my idea with these bundles is that it contains packages that reference a bunch of other module packages with common configurations. So for example, a typical workflow server will reference this Elsa bundle, which itself in turn references most commonly used packages like the mediator and of course workflow related modules. And then there's a all-in-one web application, and that hosts both the Elsa designer as well as a workflow server. So this is what we call in Elsa 2 the monolith setup. And this one is the workflow server, and that's a common configuration for just having a workflow server that does not serve the designer. So that would require the user to create their own dashboard application, into which they can of course host the reusable Elsa designer components. So the syntax to configure Elsa looks like this. So it's the same as in Elsa 2. So there's the add Elsa extension method on the iService collection object. But the Elsa lambda parameter, as you can see, it's an I module, and that basically is consumed by the other modules to add their own services to the system. And it's a convenient mechanism to register other services because it also allows you to define dependencies between modules. And this is all to make it easier for the user to configure Elsa so that they can just do something like this, add Elsa, and then this should enable a default, most commonly used configuration of Elsa. But if you want, you can then drill into the details and tweak the configuration as you see fit. In this way, you can add features, remove features, and change default settings. So that was a lot of refactoring. It took up quite some time, but I think it's pretty clean. I'm pretty happy with it. So that is everything about the server registration cleanup. A new contribution came in today that adds resizable panels to the Elsa 3 designer, which is pretty cool. I'll show you what that looks like. So for example, let's go to the workflow definitions and open a workflow definition here. And these two panels now are resizable. And this is very convenient because for certain activities, you may need some more screen real estate to conveniently change the properties of a given activity. So that's cool. I've been working on the workflow instance viewer. So what we see here is the workflow definition editor. But when you execute workflows, workflow instances will be created. And of course, you will want to look at those workflow instances. So there's a workflow instances modal here. And here I just have one workflow instance that I will now open. It opens that workflow of this version in the designer here. It's in read-only mode, so you shouldn't be able to drag and drop. But I think I just broke it or forgot to implement this. Work in progress, as you can see. And the panel on the right hand side is different compared to the workflow definition editor. Here it shows workflow instance related information like the instance ID, the definition ID, the version, etc., the status, and some timestamps. So the next feature for me to work on is the workflow journal. And I'm thinking of adding it to the left hand side so that you always have the journal in view while looking at a workflow instance, and you have the ability to inspect individual activity properties on the right hand side. All right, so that's my brief update in a nutshell for Elsa 2 and Elsa 3. Mohammed, if you are prepared, if you like, you can demo the SQL syntax work that you've done.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So let me share my screen. Then I will quickly present. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So in here I'm going to present the new SQL syntax, and basically because we are using the Monaco editor, I was looking for some time how we can implement the SQL syntax support. So now especially that we have SQL activities. So that part is now added, and you can see, for example, here we have the JavaScript liquid, and the SQL syntax now is an added option. So if you'd like to use that one, you'll get the syntax highlighting for SQL in your code and the activity. And so that is already there. And the other thing that I wanted is that for the variables like the string and the number variables, the simple ones, if I want to use that as part of my SQL query. So auto completion is also available, and it will pick from the type definitions strings and numbers, so workflow instance for definition. And also if I have defined some variables in my workflow, it will also be able to pull these ones here. So that is also possible. And for example, I can demonstrate here. I will just run this workflow, and what it's going to do is that it will pull the correlation ID and insert it as a record in the database. And one more thing here is that to handle the null values, because I think SQL has some special treatment for null. So in this activity, I'm setting this just a test variable. I'm setting the value as null. And then if I use that variable instead here, so it will also be able to handle that. So now if I test this activity, it is also able to handle the null values. So this kind of support, I think it is quite handy, especially if you have a very complex SQL queries and you want to get the code highlighting, and also if you want to integrate some variables into your query without breaking the syntax of the SQL, which I think it will be really useful moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. This looks great. Awesome. So you also had to update the execute SQL command activity to add support for the null value. Is that right?
I've done it in the handler. So the handler will check the value for the variable.
Oh, okay.
And if it is a null, it will just replace it with a null.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. Thank you.
Quick question. Do you think it could be possible to make a command like select into a variable? It's not related to your work, but maybe it could be useful. No?
Yes.
So you mean a SQL query that selects some value into a workflow variable?
Yeah, I know we can write this kind of command in SQL directly, but I don't know if there is if it is useful to do this directly with a workflow variable.
Yeah, so currently the variable handling is just as a replacement. So I'm just checking the value and then replacing it into the query. So if it's a number or if it's a string, I'm just replacing this variable with the value. But what you mentioned is I think is really helpful, and that is more about parameter handling, I think. Yeah, so that could be the next step maybe in this. Actually, currently we are doing some custom activities using Oracle, and Oracle has the concept of input and output parameters. So we have built some custom activity there to map these parameters, because we also found there's some challenge in that case. But yeah, this could be maybe some advanced way to handle the variables. If I can really select the statement and then insert it directly to the variable, that would be awesome.
Yeah, this might be related to what Tommy suggested on GitHub, where currently if you want to capture output of activities, you need to add a set variable activity to the workflow. But if you need to do this often, then it kind of pollutes the workflow with a lot of set variable activities. So this would be one nice way to work around that, so that you can directly from your command insert a SQL value or a value from the database directly into a workflow variable.
Yeah.
I think this kind of thing has to be done more globally, or not just for SQL command activity.
That's right. And of course, this suggestion is specific for the SQL query activity, but you're right, to make it more convenient holistically, that requires a different solution.
This feature is very cool.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you so much, Mohammed.
Thank you.
All right, Jay, I know you have a PR open. Should we spend a couple of minutes talking about that one?
Yeah, sure.
Do you want to walk us through what's been done and what is the status, and do you need anything from me?
Yes, try to get the commit and launch everything. So the ID, if we take a look at the PR, so I have some, I think, race condition issue with a UI event. So the ID, do you see my screen?
1 second. Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so the ID is to be able to create more than 2 drop-down lists in Cascade. And so here I have a brand with a different car. Then for each car I will have some model, and with the combination of brand and model I can have different color. So everything in for the data is configured on the backend in C# using the iRuntime select list item. And so we can then plug this to a database, for example. And one issue I have is when I select, for example, here Tesla, I should have a problem with the event because some elements are repeat in my list.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
So this is here I have the color, for example, and the model. So I think it's a UI issue. And if we take a look at the C#, the idea is to use the dropdown. Okay, use an option provider like we do with natural dropdown. And here I have just had some option, and these options are used in the UI. So it's a little trick for now, but as explained in the PR, we could add some property in the activity input, which could be depends on property and depends on value. Because here I want to, for example, for the model, I need to update the model when the user change the brand list. So I need to depend on the event change on brand, but I want to get the value of the model and brand to show different color. That is how I implement this in the get select list. For example, if my property change is brand, I will do the different return the different element. If the name is model, I will check what value are sent to the API to choose the good model regarding the brand. And for color, I need the brand and the model. And because I choose in the option model and brand, the UI send me the two values. So
I see.
elements configured here are used by the UI, but generically to send the value and to react to specific event. This line is just a trick for the event to be sure to use the event or model, but it will disappear if we add the two properties.
Yeah, you mean the depends on property
Yes.
and depends on event?
Yes, that's right. So this line is depend on event, the line 64, and the line 65 is depend on a value.
Got it.
And then in the get select list, I think we could change this code to use a database and to use a lazy select on the database, for example. And this could be really helpful for this kind of choice.
This will be great because this way users can implement cascading dropdowns selections without having to write custom plugins for the designer.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. All right, so it looks like you only need to do a little bit of cleanup, introduce the depends on event and property.
Yes.
And we need to fix the race condition in the UI that you mentioned.
Yes. I don't find, I do a lot of tests. I don't succeed to find the issue on the UI. So for this, I need your help. And I can clean up the code before and add the depends on event and depends on value.
Yeah, perfect. So if you work on that and let me know when that's part of the PR, then I will take a crack at fixing the UI issue.
Okay, that's good. And
Awesome.
I think I have only 2 change files, so everything should be in the Elsa dropdown property.
Yeah, these are my favorite PRs, just 2 changed files. Very cool.
Good.
Thanks, Jay.
You're welcome. And I just have one question about the loading, what you show at the beginning for Elsa 3. I don't know if you can just show your notes.
Oh, am I sharing? No.
Yeah. Are you sharing?
I think I am.
Okay, for the service registration, I'm just wondering if for Elsa 3 we could register some activity like plugin. So once the server is started in the life cycle of the application, we can, using an API, load with a package, send a package to an API, and load new activity using a plugin architecture.
Right. So the answer is yes, but what it would require, I think, is being able to load a package or an assembly from a package into the current app domain. And with ASP.NET Core or .NET Core, the way to do this has changed. I've done it myself, but there is good support, I believe, these days to do so. So that would be possible. But of course, the activities are registered at startup time. But I think if we take a look at the implementation, you should be able to add it at runtime as well. Yeah, because here there is a API options object that's being configured during startup, but you could inject this options of API options to then add more activity types at runtime. So that is certainly possible. Maybe we need to create a nice API to make it easy for users to do so. But it should definitely be possible.
Okay, I think when I will start to work on Elsa 3, I will try this.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I was checking same thing the other day. In the Microsoft Docs itself, there is page for the Net Core plugins, how to load the assemblies at runtime,
Yeah.
and also how to make it work with dependency injection in the container. So I think from that angle it is possible, but then it will be how to do that with Elsa.
Yeah, the idea is if everything is well decoupled with using interface, we could load different things, and there is no abdomen, and the unloading of assembly is a little bit different, but there is a very good sample on the MSDN.
That's cool. Yeah, then let's give that a try. I know it's been asked multiple times in Elsa 2 to add support for loading assemblies at runtime. So let's see if there's any changes we need to make in the Elsa library itself.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a link to that MSDN article by any chance?
Yes. So it's the use of assembly load context. And it's easy to use, and we just have to be sure that we can unload the assembly after to be very powerful.
Indeed, this is very cool. Yeah, we should definitely add support for this.
Yeah, I think even if you consider, for example, the SQL activity, so you can have an adapters for different database drivers in that case. So if I want to load for Oracle, for SQL Server, it will become really powerful.
Yeah, especially if you have an Elsa workflow server hosted somewhere and you want to be able to add plugins at runtime dynamically, then this is what allows you to do this.
But in fact, this kind of feature is also linked to the capability to execute some activity in specific environment, because if we can, for example, start one container to execute a specific activity, we can load a specific container with some external dependencies to execute this activity. It could be good also, and it's another kind of using plugin.
You mentioned this topic a couple of meetings ago.
Yeah. So this is my 2 points on Elsa 3, plugin and context execution, what I call context execution.
Yeah, I remember. That's great. I look forward to those PRs. Okay. Do you have anything else?
Not for me. That's good.
All right. In that case, I'm gonna stop the recording.